don't know about you, but are you a person that saves old Christmas cards? Anybody do that? Yeah, a few of you. Anybody save old birthday cards? Oh, I don't know what you do. What do you do with them? Throw them out, keep them and see how many you can recycle them. And I'm one that I don't normally keep old Christmas cards and I don't normally keep old birthday cards, but I've got one here from last week that Rita got me and I've kept it. Thanks, Rita. Because it says on the front, this is a saying by Teddy Roosevelt, and it says, do what you can where you are with what you have. And I thought that's very prominent and poignant. So do what you can where you are with what you have. And sometimes we think, don't we, that we just haven't got the resources to be able to do the things that we want to do. But when we look round, we do have the resources. You know, we've got loads of talented people in this church. And we do have the resources. It's nice sometimes to have a few more resources, but do what you can with what you've got. So I just wanted to share that before I sort of launched into what I want to talk about today. 2 weeks ago, I mentioned a phrase that I mention quite a lot, and Brian's going to pop it up on the screen. If you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always had. And you think, so true is that. You know, some people attribute this particular saying to Henry Ford, and others attribute this saying to a guy called Tony Robbins. He's a preacher in America. Quite good to listen to if you've got 5 minutes or if you've got an hour to spend. He does go on for quite a while. But I'm not really bothered who you want to attribute this saying to. Whether, you know, people think, oh, Tony's picked it up off Henry Ford. Well, does it really matter? Because the fact is, it's true. And that's my point. You know, it's a very, very true saying. It's not a bad thing, though. You know, I always in the past have looked at this particular saying and thought, yeah, if we always do what we've always done, we'll always get what we've always had. And if we're not happy with what we've had in the past, then we'll sort of dwell on this particular thing and think, well, we need to change the things we do. But just think about it another way. If you are happy about the things that you're doing and you continue to do the things that you've always done, then you will continue to get the happiness that you've already had and always had, and hopefully you're going to get in the future. So it might not be as negative as it sounds. So here's a question to you this morning. What are those things for you that you always do? In other words, what are your qualities? Or it could be the opposite, couldn't it? What are your inferiorities? You know, it's funny, isn't it? You get an application form for a job and they always ask now for, you know, what are your qualities? And then they ask the opposite, don't they? You know, what are your weaknesses? They ask for your strengths, but they always ask for your weaknesses. And it's very difficult, isn't it, to put down our strengths and weaknesses. I don't know why. It must be some psychological thing going on in our minds that we don't like to talk about our strengths and weaknesses. If we talk about our strengths, it makes us feel as though we're trying to sort of make ourselves bigger than we actually are. And then who wants to talk about the weaknesses? Dear me. I could ask you, are you an half-empty person or are you a half-full person? You know, when there's only half a bottle of wine left, is it, oh, that's not going to last long? Or is it, oh, I've still got half a bottle left? You know, where is it? You know, where do we stand? And it's how we frame. We talked weeks and weeks ago at a day that we had here, like looking at the future, looking at where we were, looking at where we wanted to be. And we looked about framing our morning when we wake up. How do we frame, not just our morning, but how do we frame our day as we're going along the day? How do we frame it? Half empty or half full? Are we an optimist, always expecting the best? Or are we a pessimist, expecting the worst to happen? Are we a visionary person? Who likes to watch that program that Michelle's always watching, Grand Designs? We watched one last night. It was sort of a reprint or repeat of one that had been on a few years ago. And this couple bought this old cowshed to live in. And it only had like 2 walls remaining, but they were visionary people. This couple was visionaries. And Kevin MacLeod's looking at it and going, what? You know, what? why don't you just knock it down and start again? And he said, no, we want to keep it. We can see the vision. And when it took like 5 years, he revisited 5 years later, and it was all finished. And they'd got this like in their kitchen. It was like open plan, but this kitchen area, they'd got this wall, and it was like an old wall, and it had got paint on it. And he says, oh, that's the original wall from the cowshed, isn't it? And he said, yeah. He says, I see that you've kept it. And he said, yeah, because we can see where we've come from to get to the point where we are today. They'd had all the hard work and the effort and the blood, sweat and tears, but they wanted reminding of that. And they kept a little thing there just to remind them that they had the vision to carry on. And sometimes in our lives, we just don't have the vision to carry on. So what's your most important quality? I'm going to give you a challenge. Just turn to the person at the side of you and tell them your most important quality. That's a challenge, isn't it? Dear me, that was quick. And it gone quiet quick. No, I'm only joking. Here's one. Here's the next challenge. This is more difficult. What's your worst quality? And that's an oxymoron, really, isn't it? What's your worst quality? So, your best worst quality. What's your best worst quality? Technology. Is it technology? Is it leaning on buttons? Me? Well, that didn't take long either, does it? Here's another question. I'm not going to ask you to share any of these. I'm not going to put you on the spot, but thanks for sharing with that person at the side of you. I'm sure those conversations might go on a little bit later. What's your most best spiritual quality? What's your most best spiritual quality? And I know we've got some amazing prayers in this church. And I would say that is your best spiritual quality, to be a prayer. Because with things happen in our lives and we forget to pray, and then we shoot up a prayer to God when it's probably not too late, but we could have done it a while earlier, a tad earlier. Let me just share this with you. Your greatest potential to impact everything you do lies within yourself. But we don't think of it that way, do we? We think about it's the world that, for some people, they think the world owes them a living. And for other people, they think, well, whatever I do, it's just going to be the life that is dealt to me, and I can't do anything about it. So your greatest potential to impact everything that you do lies within you, or you are your own worst enemy. And how many of us could say that? I'm my own worst enemy at times. As a born-again Christian, God's Spirit lives within you. Have you ever thought of it that way? The living Spirit of God actually living within you? To be the person that God intended you to be. Paul says this in 2 Timothy. He says, God did not give us a spirit of timidity, but a spirit of power, of love, and of self-discipline. He didn't give us that spirit to be timid, but to have a spirit of power. We think about, you think about Christians, and I'm sure that some people think Christians should be quiet and not heard. Jesus was not that sort of person. He was definitely a person that was not heard. He was definitely heard as he went, around Galilee and ministering to the people around. So the question is, what do we do with it? What do we do with that spirit that is not timid? The spirit that was placed in our hearts when we became a Christian. What do we do with it? Do we allow it to do things, or do we just put it in a box like I was talking about 2 weeks ago? It's the key to our spiritual growth. It's the key to our ministerial impact. When we think about what we're doing in the community, the spirit that lies within us is our key to doing the things that God wants us to do. It's the key to our physical health. It's the key to our relationships with the people around us. And it's the key to our financial potential. But do we allow it? In other words, what I'm saying is, do we trust God for the things that we do? Do we trust God for our spiritual growth? Do we trust God for our ministerial impact on those people around us, the ones that we're trying to minister to? Or do we try to do it our way? And quite often in our lives, we try to do things our way. And when it doesn't work, then we think about involving God in the equation. Perhaps it should be the other way around. Perhaps it should be that way around when we're thinking about our physique and our physical health and what we do to our bodies. Should we involve God in that whole equation? And what about our relationships, not just between us and God, but between ourselves and other people? And here's a big one. What about our finance? Do we involve God in our finances? You know, in our personal finances, in our tithing? Do we involve God in that? Or do we just push it into another little box again and say, no, I'll do what I want to do? But doesn't everything come from God in the first place? And shouldn't we be giving back to God some of the stuff that he gives to us? In Malachi 3:10, he says this. He says, bring the whole tithe into the storehouse, that there is more food in my house. And then he says something incredible. He says, will you test me on this? Test me. He says, bring the whole tithe into the storehouse and then test me on it. And see if I will not throw open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessing upon you that there will be not enough room in those storehouses to store it. And what do we do with that Malachi verse? We put it in a box again. Or we probably never even get it out of the box in the first place. You know, your potential is immeasurable because with God, everything is possible. Our potential is not what we see on TV, because when we watch the advertisements on TV, they give us a false impression of who that we should be. They give us an impression that is not what God would intend for us to be. And that gives us and puts us in a very funny position where we think that we need to be as good as the people that we see on telly. It's not our background, it's not our education, and it's not the way that we look. I'll tell you what it is. It's our consistency. And that's what I want to talk about this morning, about being consistent in the things that we do. You know, at least 50% of the people that hear this talk this morning could say, why am I always consistently negative? Why am I always, when I get up in the morning, why am I always consistently negative? Why do I always feel screwed? You know, when I'm thinking about doing something, why do I always look on the negative side of things? Why do I always feel that if I do it, I'm just going to do it wrong, so I won't do it anyway? That is not what God intends us to do. Every day is a school day. We need to remember that. Every day is a school day. We always say, don't we, I'm inconsistent at eating, and that's why I can't lose weight if I'm on a diet. Or I'm inconsistent in reading the Bible, so I'm not going to read it anyway. What's the point of that? Because I'll just be so inconsistent, I'm not going to do it. And if you're thinking about exercise, well, I know we're so inconsistent at that. That's pointless starting that either. And what about timekeeping? I'm always late, so why try to change, you know, the things that I always do? I might as well just be late. Our good intentions, and we have good intentions in our lives, but quite often we struggle to follow through. And you know, on Tuesday morning, as I'm thinking about what I was going to say today, Tuesday morning in our morning prayers is Paul writing to the church in Rome. So the people that join us in morning prayer will probably remember what was said in Romans 7 on Tuesday morning. And can I just remind you that we have a prayer group meeting every Tuesday morning at 9 o'clock on Zoom. If you want to join that group, just let me know and we'll give you the link. And if you don't do Zoom but you want to ring up on the telephone, because there's a few people that do that and join in on the telephone, we can do that as well. So there's a number of people that meet every week to pray. And we also meet on Wednesdays as well for another service, a traditional service. And I think we forget to tell people that we do that as well. So come and have a chat with me if you think that you might want to join in those things. But Paul says this to the church in Rome in chapter 7 at verse 15. He says, I don't really understand myself, for I want to do what is right, but I don't do it. We've read it before, I know, but it's good to be reminded about it, isn't it? But there's me thinking about consistency, and then God drops this particular passage into our prayer group on Tuesday morning. He says, instead, I do what I hate. I want to do what is right, but I can't. I want to do what is good, but I don't. I don't do the things that I should be doing, but I do them anyway. Paul had got good intentions, but even Paul, who writes all that stuff in the New Testament, and he's even writing to the church in Rome and telling them, I've got good intentions, but I'm not that good. You know, people were looking up to Paul at that time as we look up to Jesus. And he's saying, you know, don't put me on a pedestal because I'm just going to fall off. He had good intentions, but he struggled to follow through. And if you're tired of having good intentions and falling short again and again and again, this message is for you. The power of this word, consistency. I've talked before, and I don't know how long ago it was, about pre-deciding what we do, about making decisions before that moment in time where we've got to actually make the decision. You know, having direction in our life. Being ready, being consistent, being devoted, being generous, being faithful, being a finisher. Who's bad at finishing? I'll put my hand up at that. How many things have I started and not finished? But I try to. I try and I try and I try, but I don't quite get there all the time. But it's good to pre-decide. Let's pre-decide to finish. Successful people do consistently what other people do occasionally. In other words, we are what we repeatedly do. Not what we occasionally do that makes the difference, but it's our consistency to carry on and push through. Do you remember a few weeks ago, I think 3 weeks ago, I talked about the book of Ezra and how the Babylonians came and destroyed Jerusalem, and how Daniel, you know, I think a few weeks before that, or even a few months ago, I talked about Daniel. And Daniel was a guy that was really, really consistent. And thinking, you know, when King Darius came in and took all those young lads and everyone else, and he took them off to exile, and he saw in Daniel something that he didn't see in other people, and that was this word, consistency. You know, in whatever was happening, he saw that Daniel was consistent. If I give him a job, he's just going to do it. He's consistent in doing it. He's consistent in getting it right. And people just didn't like it. You know, when there's people that look really good and we think, oh, I don't like that because they're better than me. And there was a group of people, do you remember the story? How these other people didn't like what Daniel was doing, and they went to King Darius and they said, look, there's people that are not worshipping you, and they're worshipping other people, and they're worshipping gods, and it's not right, and we think that you should write a decree and stop them from doing it. And they convinced him, because we do things that people convince us to do when they're not right. And King Darius wrote this decree. And 30 days later, they went back to him and they said, look, there's a guy, and he's not been bowing down to you, he's been bowing down to this God. And we know the story goes on where Daniel's put in the lion's den. Because it says in Daniel 6:10 that when Daniel learned that the law had been signed, he went home and he knelt down as usual, it says in the text. As usual, he went to his upstairs room with his windows open towards Jerusalem, and he prayed 3 times a day, as usual, giving thanks to God, because Daniel was consistent. And in that lion's den, God sent the angel to close the mouths of the lions. And when Daniel came out of that lion's den, it says this at verse 23, it says, and when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wounds could be found on him, because he had trusted in God. He didn't trust in God in the lion's den. He trusted God in his upstairs room when he prayed 3 times a day. That's where he learned God's trust daily. Not in that one point of, I need God right now and I'll send up that arrow prayer. He was consistent in the praying that he'd done for many, many months and years before. Most of us pray inconsistently, but Daniel prayed consistently. And just have a look at Paul in the New Testament. He was a man that said, look, I'm not right good at this, but he was a trier. And he was consistent in trying. He was beaten, but he got back up again. And consistently he went out and he preached the good news. And then he was flogged, and he consistently got back up and he went out and he preached the good news. And then he was consistently shipwrecked, and he got up, dried himself off, and he started preaching the message again. And finally, he gets imprisoned. And consistently, he must have thought, as Rob shared last week about one of his relatives like being incapacitated, and thinking and actually saying, oh, now I've got a captive audience. And this is Paul in prison with a captive audience, exactly the same, consistently in doing the things that he did. So you might want to ask yourselves, well, how could I be consistent in the good things that I do and inconsistent in the bad things that I do? And there's three things, and you might want to just start with a why. Why would I want to be consistent in doing the things that I think are good? And then you might want to plan to fail, because you might be like Paul and you won't get it right every time. And then you're just going to have to fall in love with the process, because it is a process. So you might want to start with the why. Why was Daniel consistent? Because he loved God. Why was Paul consistent? Because he loved God and he wanted to go out and preach the message. They got that inward devotion, that inward love of God. Think of it this way. Consistency is the bridge between the dream and the reality. The bridge between the dream and reality. Consistency is the evidence of maturity. And consistently, we should be thinking about consistency as our rule of life. I just want to jump to Psalm 1 that I was reminded of on Tuesday evening just before I came to our PCC meeting. And David was an inconsistent, consistent person, a guy that just kept falling but just kept getting back up again. And he says this in Psalm 1. He says, "Blessed is the one who does not walk in step with the wicked, or stand in the way of sinners, or in the company of mockers, but who delights in the law of the Lord, and who meditates on this day and night." That person is like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in season, and whose leaves do not wither, and whatever they do prospers. Just think about, as we look at the season that we're in now with the sun that we've been having for many, many weeks. I know we got a little bit of rain. I heard that it thundered and lightened in the middle of the night, but I don't know anything about that. I'd slept through that. But just thinking about, where are the trees that are flourishing? Probably next to the beck, the ones next to the river taking the water. And that's what we need to do. We need to be consistently pressing into God and asking Him for all that we need in our lives. Jesus says, "Abide in me, and I will abide in you." And in the CEV version of the Bible, it says this, "Stay joined to me," He says, "and I will stay joined to you." Just as a branch cannot produce fruit unless it stays joined to the vine, you cannot produce fruit unless you stay joined to me. Be consistent. "I am the vine," He says, "and you are the branches. If you stay joined to me, I will stay joined to you. And then we will produce lots of fruit, being consistent. But you cannot do anything without me," He says. "If you don't stay joined to me, you will be thrown away. You will be like dry branches that are gathered up and burned in the fire. Stay joined to me and let my teachings become part of you. Then you can pray for whatever you want, and your prayer will be answered. When you become fruitful disciples of mine, my Father will be honored. I have loved you just as my Father has loved me, so remain faithful to me and remain faithful to my Father." In other words, what Jesus is saying, be consistent. It's simple, isn't it? And you know that there must be many of us that have had 6 months ago a New Year's resolution. I'm not going to ask you to put your hands up, but I'm sure that some of you 6 months ago, 1st of January, will have started a New Year's resolution. I've not asked you to put your hands up because I would have then asked you how many of you are still doing that resolution that you started 6 months ago. Have you been consistent? You know, the doctor, if you're a smoker, the doctor might say to you, you need to give up smoking. Why would you wait till January? You know, we're in June. Why would you wait till January to give up? But some people do, don't they? They get something that they're told they need to do in like just early December or November, and it's like, I'll just wait until after Christmas and then I'll start. And then do they start? If they start, they fail. Grow inconsistently. That's what we need to do. We need to start with a why. Why would I want to give up smoking? Because it would be better for my health. That's the why. And fall in with the process, you know, fall in love with that process because you know you're going to fail. Daniel prayed 3 times a day, but there must have been times when he couldn't get there because the king kept him back to do a job. We put people in the Bible on a pedestal, like David and Daniel and Noah and all the rest of them. You name them all. We can put them all on a pedestal, but all of them fell. But all of them got back up again. Why are we so inconsistent? Because it's about a mindset thing. We need to have the mindset. You know, some people think about the goal and then think they're never going to be able to get to the goal, so that's why we stop doing it. Some people might join Slimming World because they want to lose 20 pounds, and after they've been going for like 6 months and they've only lost 5 pounds, they just stop going because they think, I'm never going to get to the goal. We just need to be consistent, and perhaps the goal is not the ultimate thing. It's just about being on the process of doing it. Years ago, I used to do karate. Michelle shared this with somebody the other day. She told me, you know, you go through different coloured belts when you start to do karate. And we used to have a taekwondo group that used to meet in the church, and now they meet in their own place in the centre of town. But the fact is, I could ask you the question, what is the hardest belt to get? Is it the white one or is it the black one? And most people will say, well, obviously it's the black belt. That must be the hardest belt to attain. Well, no, the hardest belt to attain is the first one, because you've got to make the choice in the first place to start. And if you never start, you're never going to get the white belt. And the black belt is just a dirty white belt. And that's the old principle of having different colours. So the people that started doing that particular thing many years ago in China would start with a white belt, and it would just get dirtier and dirtier and dirtier over time. They never washed it, and eventually it would become black. And that is why black belt is for people that have been doing it for a long time and get very proficient at it. It's about not quitting. It's about carrying on, but it's about taking the first step in the first place. I'm going to ask you if you are willing and able to stand. Shall we just stand together? About 10 minutes ago, I quoted Paul writing to Timothy when he said that God does not give us the spirit of timidity, but the spirit of power, love, and self-discipline. When I wrote those words in my notes for today, somebody sent me a WhatsApp message. And it said on the WhatsApp message, I think these words are for the church. Ezekiel 36, 25 to 28. If you want to hold your hands out in a sort of posture of receiving from God, it might be a good idea. Because the words that was given to Ezekiel and the words that was given to me by the person that sent me the WhatsApp message, just thinking about Paul writing to Timothy, saying that he doesn't give us a spirit of timidity, but a spirit of power and of truth. And in Ezekiel 36 it says this, or God says this, I will sprinkle clean water on you, and you will be clean. I will cleanse you from all your impurities. I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit within you. I will remove from you your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. And I will put my spirit in you and move you to follow my decrees and be careful to keep my laws. Then you will live in the land that I have given to your ancestors, and you will be my people, and I will be your God. How amazing is this God that speaks to us like that? As I'm looking at what I'm going to speak to today, and then God speaks that very word to somebody else to give to me. That is God speaking today. Does God still speak today? Of course God still speaks today, because he is a good, good Father, giving you that spirit of power and of truth and of love. So Father, we just thank you today for all that you provide for us. We thank you for this wonderful day that we've had today, and we know that it's not yet over. We've got a lot of living yet to do. We thank you for our lives and for this church and for all that you do with us and through and into our community. And we praise you, Lord, in Jesus' name. And everyone said, Amen. So as we stood ready to receive his Spirit, we're also stood ready to praise his name. So let's do that right now.